Millionaire divorced his wife and his sick twins to marry model. Unaware, his wife had won a $750 million contract. You have 30 seconds to explain why you deserve even a single stock option from the woman you called a liability. Cassandra Brennan's voice cut through the stunned silence of the St. Regis ballroom like a blade through silk. 500 guests sat frozen in their seats. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across her midnight blue gown as she stood at the podium. One hand resting on a remote control, the other gripping the edge of the marble lectern. Her eyes were locked on table 9. Preston Vale sat motionless, his champagne glass halfway to his lips, his face draining of color as recognition dawned. The mysterious new CEO everyone had been whispering about all evening, the billionaire tech founder, who had just announced the acquisition of Ashworth Capital's remaining assets, was his ex-wife. The same woman he had divorced 18 months ago. The same woman he had called damaged goods while their premature twins fought for their lives in the NICU. The same woman he had abandoned for a supermodel turned venture capitalist who was now sitting beside him in a designer gown that cost more than his first car. "I'm sorry, what?" Preston's voice came out as a hoarse whisper, barely audible over the shocked murmurs rippling through the crowd. Cassandra smiled, and there was no warmth in it. Just the cold satisfaction of someone who had spent 18 months planning this exact moment. "You heard me, Preston. 30 seconds. Explain to everyone here why the man who emptied our joint savings account while our children needed medical care deserves to keep his stock options in the company I now own." 28 seconds. 27. The woman sitting next to Preston, Giselle Ashworth, former Sports Illustrated, model and heir to the Ashworth Capital fortune, put her hand on his arm. Her perfectly manicured nails were the color of fresh blood. "Preston, don't say anything. We're leaving. Actually, Ms. Ashworth, you might want to stay." Cassandra pressed a button on her remote, and the screen's position throughout the ballroom flickered to life. "Because what I'm about to share concerns you, even more than it concerns him. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who claimed to love you? Have you ever poured everything you had into building a life with someone, only to watch them walk away the moment things got difficult? Have you ever been told that you and your children were complications, inconveniences, obstacles to someone else's happiness?" Cassandra paused, letting her gaze sweep across the audience. Tech executives, venture capitalists, government officials, and journalists. They were all leaning forward now, phones out, recording. This was going to be the story of the year. "I'm going to tell you what happens when a man trades his family for what he thinks is a better deal. I'm going to show you what happens when a woman uses wealth and connections as weapons to destroy someone who did nothing but tell the truth. And I'm going to prove to you that some women don't break when everything falls apart. They rebuild themselves into something unbreakable." Preston stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "Cass, this is insane. You can't just ambush people like this. Whatever you think you're doing, we can discuss this privately. Sit down, Mr. Vale." The authority in Cassandra's voice made several people flinch. This wasn't the exhausted, overwhelmed woman Preston had left behind. This was someone entirely different, someone who had learned to wield power with surgical precision. "You gave up the right to private conversations when you served me divorce papers while our son was in the ICU. You gave up the right to my discretion when you emptied our savings account to buy your mistress jewelry. You gave up the right to my mercy when you told the family court judge that our children would be better off with you and Miss Ashworth because I was too unstable to provide proper care. So no, Preston, we're not discussing anything privately. Sit down." Preston sat. Giselle's hand tightened on his arm, her knuckles white. She was calculating, trying to figure out what Cassandra knew and how to minimize the damage. Cassandra could see it in the slight narrowing of her eyes, the way her jaw tensed beneath her flawless makeup. But this story doesn't start in this ballroom. It doesn't start with stock options or acquisitions or revenge. It starts 3 years ago, in a cramped apartment in Palo Alto, with two people who thought they had everything figured out. It starts with love and ambition, and the naive belief that partnership means standing together when life gets hard. It starts before everything fell apart. Before I learned that the man I married was capable of cruelty I never imagined. Before I discovered that betrayal tastes like champagne and smells like expensive perfume. Cassandra clicked to the next slide, and a photo appeared on the screens. A younger version of herself and Preston on their wedding day, smiling in front of a small church in Charleston, South Carolina. Her grandmother stood beside them in her Sunday best, tears streaming down her weathered face. If you believe that people should be held accountable for the hearts they break, I need you to stay with me. If you've ever been abandoned by someone who promised forever, this story is for you. If you've ever been told you weren't good enough, that your dreams were too big, that your circumstances made you a liability instead of an asset, I need you to hear what happened next. Because what Preston Vale didn't know when he walked away from our marriage was that the struggling woman he left behind had just won a $750 million government contract. And what Giselle Ashworth didn't know when she helped him destroy my reputation was that I spent 18 months collecting evidence of every crime, every lie, every calculated move she made to ensure I lost everything. The room was absolutely silent now. No one was checking their phones. No one was reaching for their drinks. Every eye was fixed on Cassandra. This is the story of how I went from begging my husband not to abandon our sick children to becoming the woman who controls his entire future with the stroke of a pen. This is the story of how betrayal became fuel, how devastation became determination, how the woman called a liability became the one holding all the assets. And before we're done here tonight, you're going to understand that sometimes the universe doesn't give you what you want. It gives you exactly what you need to become who you were always meant to be. But first, let me take you back to where it all began. Stanford University, 6 years earlier. The graduate library at 2 a.m. That's where I met Preston Vale. I was working on my master's thesis in cybersecurity, trying to solve a vulnerability problem that had stumped better engineers than me. I'd been at it for 14 hours straight, fueled by terrible coffee and the stubborn belief that there had to be a solution. My eyes were burning. My back ached from hunching over my laptop, and I was ready to throw my computer out the window when someone sat down across from me. "You're Cassandra Brennan, right? From Professor Mitchell's network security seminar." I looked up, irritated at the interruption, and found myself staring at a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a Ralph Lauren catalog. Preston Vale. I knew who he was. Everyone in the business school knew who he was. Old money family from Connecticut, MBA candidate who'd already had 2 job offers from top-tier venture capital firms before he'd even defended his thesis. The kind of guy who wore expensive watches and talked about summer homes in the Hamptons like everyone had one. Yeah, that's me. "And you're about to tell me that the library closes in 30 minutes and I need to pack up." Preston smiled, and it transformed his whole face. Made him look less like a catalog model and more like a real person. "Actually, I was going to ask if you wanted help. I've been watching you glare at that screen for the past hour, and I'm pretty sure you're about to commit laptop homicide. I'm decent with code. Maybe a fresh pair of eyes would help." I should have said no. Should have gathered my things and left. Should have recognized that men like Preston Vale didn't offer help to women like me without wanting something in return. But I was exhausted and frustrated and desperate for a breakthrough. "Fine. But if you waste my time with basic suggestions I've already tried, you're buying me coffee for a week." He sat down next to me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something expensive and subtle. He leaned over to look at my screen, and within 5 minutes, he'd identified a vulnerability in my vulnerability. A hole in my logic that I'd been too tired to see. We worked together until the library kicked us out at closing. Then we moved to an all-night diner and worked until dawn. By the time the sun came up, we'd solved the problem, consumed an entire pot of coffee in. I'd learned that Preston Vale wasn't just a trust fund kid coasting on his family's name. He was smart, genuinely smart. And when he looked at me, he didn't see a scholarship student from South Carolina, whose grandmother had cleaned houses to pay for her daughter's education. He saw an equal. That's how it started. Late-night study sessions that turned into coffee dates that turned into dinners that turned into weekends where we'd hole up in his apartment and talk about building something extraordinary together. Preston wanted to revolutionize venture capital, invest in companies that actually mattered, instead of just chasing profit margins. I wanted to solve the cybersecurity crisis that was leaving government systems and private companies vulnerable to attacks that could cripple entire infrastructures. "We're going to change the world," he told me one night as we lay on his apartment floor, staring at the ceiling and dreaming out loud. "Your genius, my business sense. We're unstoppable, Cass. Absolutely unstoppable." I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. We got married 2 years after graduation. Small ceremony in my hometown because that's what my grandmother wanted. She wore her best dress and cried through the entire service. She'd raised my mother alone after my grandfather died. Worked 3 jobs to send my mother to college. then helped raise me when my mother got sick. She'd sacrificed everything so I could have opportunities she never had. And seeing me marry a man from a family like Preston's, seeing me build a life that didn't involve scrubbing other people's floors, or choosing between paying rent and buying groceries, it meant everything to her. Baby, you did it. You broke the cycle. You became everything I prayed you'd be. Preston's family came to the wedding, but you could see the doubt in their eyes. The polite reservation that said they viewed their son's marriage to a woman from a working-class background as a phase, something he'd grow out of once the novelty wore off. Preston's mother spent the entire reception asking pointed questions about my career prospects and making subtle comments about how challenging it was to bridge cultural differences in a marriage. But Preston didn't care. Or at least I thought he didn't care. He held my hand through every awkward conversation, introduced me to his family's friends as the smartest woman he'd ever met, made me feel like I wasn't just good enough for his world. I was better than it. We're going to build something beautiful together, he whispered during our first dance. Something that proves love isn't about where you come from. It's about where you're going. For 4 years we tried. We both worked insane hours. Me at a mid-sized cybersecurity firm during the day, building my own company, Secure Core Solutions, at night. Preston climbing the ladder at Ashworth Capital, networking with investors, positioning himself for a partnership. We lived in a modest condo in Palo Alto, nothing like the luxury Preston had grown up with, but it was ours. Every dollar we saved went toward our shared future. Then I got pregnant. We weren't trying, but we weren't preventing either. When the pregnancy test came back positive, Preston picked me up and spun me around our tiny kitchen. We're going to be parents. Oh my God, Cass. We're going to be parents. The joy lasted until the first ultrasound, when the technician got very quiet and asked us to wait for the doctor. Twins. Identical twin girls. High-risk pregnancy due to my age and some complications the doctor rattled off in medical terminology I barely understood. Bed rest for the final trimester. Possible premature birth. Specialized medical care. Preston held my hand through the entire appointment, but I could see something shift in his eyes. A calculation, an assessment of what this was going to cost. Not just financially, but in terms of time, energy, focus, all the things we'd been pouring into building our careers. But he painted the nursery anyway. Spent weekends assembling 2 cribs, researching pediatricians, reading books about parenting twins. He'd come home from work and find me on the couch, on strict orders not to move more than necessary, and he'd sit beside me with his hand on my belly. 2 little hackers. They're going to take after their brilliant mother. Stanford class of 2040. First mother-daughter team to win the Turing Award. I was put on complete bed rest at 6 months. No work, no going out. Just lying in bed or on the couch, trying not to panic every time I felt a cramp or noticed something that didn't seem right. Our savings started evaporating. I couldn't work, couldn't contribute to the household income, couldn't even work on Secure Core because the stress of running a startup while trying to keep 2 babies alive inside me was too much. Preston picked up extra projects at work, started bringing home takeout because I was too exhausted to cook. But I could see the strain building, the way he'd come home later and later. The way his responses got shorter when I tried to talk about the pregnancy or the babies or anything that reminded him how much our lives were about to change. At 28 weeks, my water broke. I was alone in the apartment, Preston at work for a pitch meeting he'd said he couldn't miss. I called him while the ambulance was on the way. Preston, it's happening. The babies are coming. I need you to meet me at the hospital. Cass, I'm in the middle of a presentation. Can't this wait a few hours? I felt something inside me crack, something fundamental about my understanding of the man I'd married. Our babies are coming 12 weeks early, Preston. No, it can't wait a few hours. He met me at the hospital 3 hours later. By then, I'd already been rushed into emergency surgery. Piper and Rowan were born weighing 2 pounds 3 ounces and 2 pounds 1 ounce respectively. They were immediately taken to the NICU, and I didn't get to hold them for 3 days. The NICU became my second home. I practically lived there, learning to change diapers through incubator portholes, timing my entire existence around feeding schedules and medical rounds. Piper had a heart murmur that required monitoring every 4 hours. Rowan's lungs were underdeveloped, and he needed a ventilator to breathe. Both of them were covered in wires and tubes, so tiny and fragile that I was terrified to touch them. Preston came to the hospital when he could, which wasn't as often as I needed. He'd stand at the edge of the NICU, looking at our daughters like they were fascinating but frightening, like he wasn't sure how to connect with these tiny humans who'd arrived before he was ready. They're so small. Are they supposed to be that small? They're premature, Preston. Yes, they're small, but they're fighters. Look at Piper. Her heart rate is getting stronger every day, and Rowan's oxygen levels are improving. They're going to be okay. How long do they have to stay here? The doctors are saying at least 8 weeks, maybe longer if there are complications. I watched something shut down in Preston's eyes. 8 weeks. 8 more weeks of living at the hospital, of medical bills piling up, of our lives revolving entirely around 2 babies who might not even survive. I need to get back to work. Ashworth is counting on me for the Henderson deal, and if I miss it, someone else will take point. Preston, our daughters are fighting for their lives, and the doctors are taking care of them. There's nothing I can do here that they can't do better. But what I can do is make sure we have enough money to pay for all this. He left, and I sat in the NICU, holding Piper's tiny hand through the incubator porthole, and I felt the first real doubt about my marriage. Insurance covered most of the medical expenses, but the hidden costs were devastating. Parking fees at the hospital, meals from the cafeteria because I couldn't leave long enough to go home and cook, the specialized formula, the equipment we'd need when they finally came home, gas money for the daily trips back and forth. It added up faster than our credit cards could handle. Preston started working overtime, weekend projects, late-night calls with investors. He'd come to the hospital once or twice a week, stay for 30 minutes, and then leave with the excuse that work was demanding his attention. And I was so exhausted, so overwhelmed with trying to keep 2 babies alive, that I didn't have the energy to fight about it. 4 months in the NICU, 4 months of watching my daughters fight for every breath, every heartbeat. 4 months of learning medical terminology I never wanted to know. 4 months of becoming an expert on apnea monitors and feeding tubes and oxygen saturation levels. And through all of it, Preston was there less and less. The babies finally came home on a Tuesday in March. Piper was 4 pounds 6 ounces. Rowan was 4 pounds 2 ounces. They required round-the-clock care, medications every 4 hours, breathing treatments for Rowan 3 times a day, heart monitoring for Piper, specialized bottles because they didn't have the strength to feed normally yet. I thought Preston would step up once they were home, that having them in our apartment, seeing them every day, would activate some parental instinct that the NICU hadn't triggered. But instead, he seemed overwhelmed by the constant needs, the crying, the medical equipment that had turned our small home into a miniature hospital ward. How long is it going to be like this? Like what, Preston? The constant crisis, the medical stuff. When do they become normal babies? I was holding Rowan, trying to get him to take his bottle while simultaneously monitoring his oxygen levels. They are normal babies. They're just premature. They need extra support right now. That's all. It's been 4 months, Cass. 4 months of living in hospitals and worrying about whether they're going to survive the night. I can't do this anymore. Can't do what? This. The constant stress. The feeling like our entire lives are on hold while we wait for them to catch up to where they should have been if they'd been born on time. I stared at my husband, this man I'd loved, and I didn't recognize him anymore. They're your daughters, Preston. Our daughters. This is parenthood. It's not always easy or convenient, or on a timeline that works for your career. Don't make this about my career. Then what is it about? He didn't answer, just grabbed his jacket and left. I heard his car pull out of the parking lot while I was still trying to get Rowan to finish his bottle. That was the beginning of the end. But I didn't know it yet. While I was learning to be a mother to 2 medically fragile infants, Preston was learning something else entirely. He was learning how much easier his life would be without us. It started with lunch meetings. Preston's boss at Ashworth Capital was Giselle Ashworth herself, the 36-year-old heir to the venture capital empire, recently divorced from a tech billionaire who'd given her $200 million in the settlement just to be rid of her. Giselle had been a supermodel before taking over her family's firm, the kind of woman who made boardrooms and magazine covers look equally effortless. Preston started mentioning her in passing. Giselle thinks I should take point on the healthcare startup portfolio. Giselle wants me to represent the firm at the investor conference in Miami. Giselle says I have excellent instincts. I was too exhausted to be jealous. Too overwhelmed with keeping 2 babies alive to worry about whether my husband's boss was giving him too much attention. I should have worried. Giselle Ashworth didn't just want Preston for his business acumen. She wanted him because taking him from me proved something she needed to prove. That she could have anything, anyone she wanted. That a woman like me from a background like mine couldn't hold on to a man from Preston's world. Their affair started 6 months after the twins came home from the NICU. I know the exact date now, thanks to the private investigator I hired 18 months later. Hotel records, credit card receipts, security footage from the Ritz-Carlton where Ashworth Capital kept a corporate suite. But at the time, I just noticed Preston pulling away, staying later at work, coming home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine, being irritated by every small thing. The way Rowan's breathing treatments interrupted his sleep. The way Piper's heart monitor beeped when her levels dropped. The way I was too tired from caring for 2 babies to care about his needs. I'm doing this for us, Cass. Someone has to make sure we stay financially stable. And I believed him. God, I believed him. Because I was so desperate to believe that my marriage wasn't falling apart, while my children were still learning how to live outside the hospital. Meanwhile, I was building something Preston knew nothing about. Secure Core Solutions. The company I'd started before the twins were born had gone dormant during the pregnancy and NICU months. But once the babies were home and on a more stable schedule, I started working again. Late nights after they were asleep, early mornings before they woke up, nap times when I should have been sleeping myself. I started small. Security audits for local tech companies, consulting work I could do remotely, building a reputation one satisfied client at a time. The work was exhausting, but it was also exhilarating. It was the one part of my life where I felt competent, where I could solve problems with logic and code instead of just hoping my babies would keep breathing through the night. My client base grew. Small tech startups became mid-sized corporations. Mid-sized corporations became Fortune 500 companies. Word spread that Cassandra Brennan could find vulnerabilities other security firms missed. That I understood systems the way some people understood music or art. That I could see the holes before anyone exploited them. 12 months after the twins came home, I landed my first major contract. A $3 million security overhaul for a financial services company that had been breached twice in 18 months. It was more money than I had made in my entire career. Enough to finally feel like we were climbing out of the financial hole the medical bills had created. I wanted to surprise Preston, to prove that I hadn't just been surviving. I'd been building. So I made a reservation at his favorite restaurant, arranged for my grandmother to watch the twins for the evening, and planned to tell him over champagne that Secure Core Solutions was finally profitable. He canceled on me 3 hours before the reservation. Cass, I'm so sorry. Giselle needs me for an emergency investor meeting. I can't get out of it. Preston, I made this reservation 3 weeks ago. You promised you'd be there. I know, and I will be. Just not tonight. Tomorrow, okay? We'll celebrate tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. There was always another meeting, another emergency, another reason why Preston couldn't show up for anything that mattered to me. So, I stopped trying. Stopped reaching out. Stopped expecting him to care about my successes or my struggles. I poured everything I had into Secure Core and into keeping Piper and Rowan healthy and growing. And Preston poured everything he had into Giselle Ashworth. 14 months after the twins came home, I got the email that would change everything. It came from the Department of Defense. An invitation to bid on the National Cybersecurity Modernization Initiative, a $750 million contract to overhaul the government's digital infrastructure, protect critical systems from foreign attacks, build security protocols that could withstand the next generation of cyber warfare. The email said Secure Core Solutions had been identified as a minority-owned firm with the expertise to lead a project of this magnitude, that my work on previous contracts had demonstrated the kind of innovative thinking they needed, that I was invited to submit a comprehensive proposal. I read that email 10 times, certain I'd misunderstood something. Secure Core was a 3-person operation run out of my apartment while I cared for 2 toddlers. The other firms bidding on this contract would be giants, companies with thousands of employees and decades of government experience. But the email was real. The opportunity was real. And I had 3 months to put together a proposal. I didn't tell Preston. I don't know if it was intuition or self-protection, but something told me to keep this quiet. To work on the proposal alone. To not give him the opportunity to diminish it or dismiss it or make it about him. So, I worked in secret. 4 months of 18-hour days, consulting with experts across the country, developing security protocols that would revolutionize how government systems protected themselves, creating cost projections that would save taxpayers hundreds of millions, while delivering better results than any competitor could promise. I worked on that proposal during Piper and Rowan's nap times, after they went to bed, before they woke up. I worked on it during the hours Preston said he was at investor meetings but was actually with Giselle. I worked on it while my marriage disintegrated around me, and I pretended not to notice. The day I submitted that proposal was the same day Preston bought Giselle a $50,000 diamond bracelet. I know because I saw the charge on our joint credit card statement. $50,000. While I was trying to figure out how to pay for Rowan's new breathing equipment, I called him at work. "Preston, did you spend $50,000 on jewelry?" There was a pause. Too long. Too guilty. "It's a business expense, Cass. Giselle's birthday. We're courting a major investor who's personal friends with her, and these things matter in venture capital. You spent $50,000 of our money on your boss's birthday present? It's an investment in my career, in our future. You wouldn't understand the kind of networking that happens at this level." I understood plenty. I understood that my husband was lying to me, that he was spending our money on another woman, that our marriage was already over, and I was just too busy keeping our children alive to acknowledge it. I hung up without saying goodbye and went back to work on the proposal, because that proposal was my escape route, my proof that I could build something extraordinary without Preston's help, my insurance policy against the disaster I could feel coming. I submitted the proposal on a Tuesday in October, clicked the final submit button at 2 in the morning while Piper slept against my chest in her carrier. I sat there in the blue glow of my laptop screen, my daughter's tiny heartbeat steady against me, and I prayed, not to get the contract, though I wanted it desperately, just for something good to happen, for something in my life to work out the way it was supposed to. 2 weeks later, Preston left me. The final breaking point came on a Wednesday evening in late October. Rowan had been hospitalized with a severe respiratory infection. His little lungs, still weak from being born so early, couldn't fight off the virus that would have been a minor cold in a full-term child. I'd been at the hospital for 48 hours straight, holding Rowan's hand while he struggled to breathe, even with the ventilator, watching monitors, talking to doctors, praying that my son would make it through another night. I was surviving on vending machine coffee in pure terror. I called Preston to bring me a change of clothes and some real food. "Cass, I'm in the middle of something. Can't this wait a few hours?" I closed my eyes, trying to keep my voice level. "Preston, your son is in the ICU. He can barely breathe. No, it can't wait a few hours. The doctors have it under control, right? I mean, he's stable?" Stable is a relative term when your child is on a ventilator, Preston. "I need you here. Please. I'll try to stop by later tonight. I promise." He didn't stop by. Not that night or the next day. Rowan was in the hospital for 5 days, and Preston visited exactly once for 30 minutes during a time he knew I'd be home showering and checking on Piper. When Rowan was finally released, when I brought him home still weak and requiring even more intensive breathing treatments than before, I found divorce papers on the kitchen table. Preston was in the bedroom, packing a suitcase. "What is this?" He didn't turn around, just kept folding expensive shirts into the leather luggage I'd given him for his birthday. "I think it's time we admitted this isn't working, Cass. Our son was just hospitalized. He's barely been home for 2 hours. And you're leaving? This isn't about Rowan. Then what is it about?" He finally turned to face me, and I saw it in his eyes. The decision had already been made. This wasn't a conversation. It was a notification. It's about us, about what our life has become, the constant medical crises, the stress, the fact that we haven't had a real conversation in months that didn't revolve around doctor appointments or breathing treatments or therapy schedules. We have 2 medically fragile children, Preston. That's our reality. It's not the reality I signed up for. Those words hung in the air between us, the truth he'd been avoiding saying for months. "You didn't sign up for this?" What does that even mean? It means I'm 32 years old, and I feel like I'm 80. It means I can't remember the last time we did anything that wasn't related to keeping 2 kids alive. It means I look at my life, and I don't recognize it anymore. I was still holding Rowan, his breathing equipment draped over my shoulder. "They're your children, Preston. I know that. But I didn't choose for them to be born 3 months early. I didn't choose for them to have all these medical problems. I didn't choose for our entire existence to revolve around crisis management. So what are you choosing? He zipped his suitcase. Giselle offered me a managing partner position at Ashworth Capital. Full partnership, equity in the firm, a future that isn't defined by whether or not our kids can breathe without machines. Giselle, I felt something cold settle in my chest. How long have you been sleeping with your boss, Preston? That's not what this is about. How long? His silence was answer enough. Does she know about the kids? About Piper's heart condition? About Rowan's lungs? She knows I have children from a previous relationship. Previous relationship? We're still married, Preston. Not for long. The papers are on the table. I'm asking for joint custody. But let's be realistic, Cass. They're better off with you as the primary parent. You're better at all the medical stuff anyway. Better at it? I'm not better at it, Preston. I'm the only one doing it. I've also closed our joint savings account and moved my half to a separate account. The documentation is with the divorce papers. I'm entitled to half of what we saved together. That money was for the twins' medical expenses. Half of that money is mine. I felt Rowan stir against me. His breathing labored even with the equipment. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You're divorcing me while our son is recovering from being hospitalized. You're leaving your children because they're medically complicated. You're stealing our savings to start a new life with your boss, and you think you're entitled to any of it? I'm entitled to move forward with my life, Cassandra. I'm entitled to choose happiness over endless crisis management. I'm entitled to a partner who has time for me instead of just time for sick kids. Get out. Cass, we can do this civilly. There's no reason to make it ugly. Get out of my house. Get away from my children. And Preston? He paused at the door. When you wake up one day and realize what you threw away, when Giselle gets bored with you and trades you in for the next shiny thing, when you finally understand that those kids you abandoned were the best thing you ever helped create, don't come back. Don't call. Don't ask for forgiveness. Because I will never forget that you looked at our son and his breathing equipment and decided he was too much trouble. Preston left, and I stood in the middle of our living room, holding Rowan, and I made a decision. I was going to survive this. I was going to build something so extraordinary that Preston's betrayal would become the best thing that ever happened to me. I was going to prove that being called a liability by the wrong man just meant I hadn't yet met the people who would recognize me as their most valuable asset. I had no idea that the phone call that would prove it was coming in less than 12 hours. The next morning, Friday, at 6:52, my phone rang. I was preparing bottles for the twins, functioning on maybe 2 hours of sleep, still processing the fact that my husband had left me. Rowan was in his bouncer chair, his breathing equipment humming steadily. Piper was in her high chair, babbling at the morning light coming through the window. The area code was Washington, D.C. I almost didn't answer. Hello? Ms. Brennan, this is Director Kenneth Hartley from the Department of Defense Cybersecurity Division. Are you sitting down? I sank into the kitchen chair, still holding Rowan's bottle. I am now. Secure Core Solutions has been awarded the National Cybersecurity Modernization Initiative contract, $750 million over 5 years. Congratulations, Ms. Brennan. You just became the youngest black female CEO to win a federal defense contract of this magnitude. The bottle slipped from my hand. Formula splattered across the kitchen floor. Rowan made a questioning sound, and I sat there, trying to process what I'd just heard. I'm sorry, what? Your proposal was exceptional, Ms. Brennan. The innovation, the cost-saving measures, the security protocols. The committee was unanimous. We'd like you to start preliminary briefings on Monday if possible. Full contract implementation begins in January. I started laughing. Couldn't help it. The absurdity of it was too much. 24 hours ago, my husband had told me I was too consumed with our sick children to be a real partner. 12 hours ago, he'd walked out on us to be with a woman who could offer him a life without complications. And now I was holding a $750 million contract in my hand. Ms. Brennan, are you all right? I'm perfect, Director Hartley. I'll be at those briefings on Monday. Thank you. Thank you so much. I hung up and looked at Piper and Rowan. My beautiful, complicated, medically fragile children. The babies Preston had called obstacles. The kids he decided were too much trouble. Your mom just became a near billionaire, I told them. And your dad has no idea. I wanted to call him. Wanted to throw it in his face that the woman he'd dismissed as too overwhelmed to be successful had just won the contract of a lifetime. But something stopped me. Some instinct that told me to wait, to be strategic, to use this information when it would have the most impact. So, I fed my children, got them dressed, started my day like nothing had changed, and I began planning. Because Preston Vale had made a critical mistake. He'd assumed that destroying me would be easy, that I would crumble under the weight of single parenthood and medical bills and his betrayal. He'd underestimated what a woman could build when she had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Over the next 18 months, I would prove just how expensive that mistake was. But before I could plan anything, I had to survive the immediate crisis. Preston had taken $28,000 from our joint savings account, money I'd been counting on to cover the twins' upcoming medical expenses. Piper needed a cardiology consultation that insurance only partially covered. Rowan's breathing equipment required monthly supplies that cost hundreds of dollars, and I had exactly 48 hours before our rent was due. The Department of Defense contract came with a signing bonus, $50 million deposited upon contract execution. But the preliminary briefings were Monday. Contract signing wouldn't happen for at least 2 weeks, and I needed money now. I called my grandmother. "Baby, what's wrong?" "I can hear it in your voice." Preston left. He filed for divorce, and he took half our savings. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then my grandmother's voice, hard as steel. "That man is a fool." "But you're not. What do you need?" "I need to borrow $5,000 to get through the next 2 weeks. I'll pay you back with interest as soon as my contract signing bonus comes through." "What contract?" "Grandma, I won a $750 million government contract. I found out this morning, about 12 hours after Preston walked out." My grandmother started laughing, the kind of laugh that comes from a lifetime of watching the universe deliver poetic justice. "Baby, the Lord works in mysterious ways. You don't need to borrow anything. I've got $7,000 in my savings account from when I sold the house. It's yours, every penny. You take it, and you take care of those babies, and you show that fool what he walked away from." "I can't take your savings, Grandma." "Cassandra Marie Brennan, I didn't raise you to be proud when you need help. That money is going to my great-grandbabies one way or another. Might as well be now when it matters. I'll wire it this afternoon. I love you, Grandma. I know you do, baby. And I know you're going to be fine. Better than fine. You're going to show the world what a woman from Charleston can do when somebody makes the mistake of underestimating her." She was right. But first, I had to get through the next 18 months. The preliminary briefings at the Department of Defense were surreal. I walked into a conference room full of generals, senior officials, and cybersecurity experts, pushing a double stroller because I couldn't afford childcare yet, and my grandmother couldn't fly out to help until the weekend. Piper and Rowan were remarkably well behaved, sleeping through most of the 3-hour meeting while I presented my implementation timeline and security protocols. "Ms. Brennan, do you have adequate support staff to execute a contract of this magnitude?" Director Hartley's question was fair. Secure Core Solutions was me, one junior developer, and a part-time administrative assistant. "I'm in the process of building my team now, Director. I have commitments from 12 of the top cybersecurity experts in the country, pending contract finalization. I also have partnerships arranged with 3 established firms who will handle the infrastructure implementation, while Secure Core maintains oversight and develops the proprietary security protocols." It was true. I'd spent the weekend making calls, pulling in favors, convincing people I'd worked with over the years that this was real and I needed their expertise. Most of them agreed immediately. A few required some persuasion. But by Monday morning, I had a team on paper. In reality, I had chaos. 2 babies who needed constant medical attention, a divorce proceeding that was about to get ugly, an ex-husband who was already positioning himself as the responsible parent, trying to protect his children from my instability, and the biggest professional opportunity of my life. Most people would have drowned. I decided to swim. The first month after Preston left was pure survival mode. I'd wake up at 4 in the morning to work on debriefing materials before the twins woke up, get them fed, medicated, and dressed by 8, video conference with my growing team, while Piper and Rowan played in their playpen beside my desk. Break for lunch and Rowan's midday breathing treatment. More calls, more work, more desperate juggling of responsibilities. Evening was bath time, Dinner, medications, breathing treatments, and getting them to bed by 8. Then I'd work until midnight or 1 in the morning before collapsing for a few hours of sleep and starting over. Preston exercised his visitation rights exactly twice in that first month. He'd show up at the scheduled time, spend 2 hours with the twins at a park or a children's museum, and bring them back. No help with medical appointments, no offering to take them overnight so I could sleep, just the minimum required by the temporary custody arrangement. But he always looked good doing it. Designer casual clothes, expensive sunglasses, taking photos with Piper and Rowan that he'd post on social media with captions about cherishing time with his daughters, building a narrative that he was the devoted father making the best of a difficult situation. Meanwhile, Giselle Ashworth was building a different narrative entirely. 6 weeks after Preston moved in with her, I got a call from my lawyer, David Chen. David was good at his job, but he was a solo practitioner. He charged reasonable rates because he believed everyone deserved quality. Legal representation, not just people who could afford the big firms. Cassandra, we have a problem. Preston's legal team just filed a motion for full custody. On what grounds? They're claiming that your work schedule makes you an absent parent, that the children are frequently left with inadequate supervision, that you're using them as props in business meetings. They've got photos of you bringing the twins to your DOE debriefings. I brought them because I couldn't afford childcare yet and my grandmother was still in Charleston, arranging to move out here. Those briefings were classified. I couldn't exactly hire a random babysitter. I know that, and you know that. But they're painting a picture of a mother so consumed with her career that she's neglecting her children's needs. And Cassandra, Preston's lawyer, is Rebecca Thornton. I felt my stomach drop. Rebecca Thornton was one of the most expensive family law attorneys in California. She represented tech executives and venture capitalists in high-stakes divorces. Her retainer alone was more than most people made in a year. How is Preston affording Rebecca Thornton? He's not. Giselle is. Of course she was. This wasn't about custody or what was best for Piper and Rowan. This was about Giselle proving she could take everything from me. My husband, my children, my sense of security. This was about grinding me into dust. What do? We fight. But Cassandra, I need to be honest with you. They're going to use your success against you. The bigger Secure Corps gets, the more they'll argue that you're prioritizing work over your children. We need to document everything. Every doctor's appointment you attend, every therapy session, every moment you're present for them. And we need character witnesses who can testify to your capabilities as a mother. I'll get you everything you need. But the legal attack was just beginning. Over the next 6 months, Preston's team filed motion after motion, requests for psychological evaluations, demands for financial disclosures, claims that I was using Secure Corps' success to try to buy the children's affection. Every filing cost thousands of dollars in legal fees. Every court appearance required me to take time away from work and the twins. The strategy was clear. Drain my resources, force me to choose between fighting for custody and building my company, make me so exhausted and overwhelmed that I'd eventually give up and accept whatever custody arrangement they offered. They didn't understand that I'd already survived the NICU, that I'd already learned how to function on no sleep and pure determination, that threatening to take my children just made me more dangerous, not less. But there was one attack I didn't see coming. 3 months after Preston left, I got a call from Director Hartley at the Department of Defense. Ms. Brennan, I need to discuss some concerns that have been raised about potential conflicts of interest regarding your contract. My blood went cold. What kind of concerns, Director? We've received allegations that Secure Corps Solutions may have accessed confidential information through your personal relationship with Preston Vale, specifically that you used insider knowledge from Ashworth Capital's government, contracting work to gain competitive advantage in your proposal. That's not true. I had no access to Preston's work. We kept our professional lives completely separate. I understand, but these allegations have been forwarded to the Inspector General's office. We're required to investigate. Until the investigation is complete, we're suspending active work on your contract. For how long? As long as it takes to verify that everything was above board. I hung up and immediately called my private investigator, Rebecca Martinez. I'd hired her 2 weeks after Preston left, on the advice of a colleague who'd gone through a nasty divorce. Rebecca was ex-FBI, specializing in financial crimes and corporate espionage. Rebecca, someone just filed a complaint with the DOE claiming I used Preston's insider information to win my contract. I need to know who filed it, and I need evidence that it's false. I'll start digging. But Cassandra, you should know that this kind of complaint, timed like this, is usually coordinated with the custody battle. They're trying to make you look unethical in court. She was right. 2 days later, Preston's legal team filed an emergency motion claiming that my questionable business practices made me an unsuitable primary parent. They requested immediate temporary custody pending the outcome of the federal investigation. The hearing was devastating. I sat in family court while Rebecca Thornton painted me as a woman so obsessed with professional success that I'd committed ethics violations and was now under federal investigation. She presented my DoD contract suspension as evidence that even the government had doubts about my integrity. Your Honor, Ms. Brennan has built her entire identity around her career success. But at what cost? She brings her young children to classified briefings because she can't be bothered to arrange proper childcare. She's under federal investigation for ethics violations. She works 18-hour days while her children are cared for by a revolving door of babysitters and family members. Meanwhile, Mr. Vale has created a stable, loving home environment where the children's needs come first. I watched the judge's expression, trying to read which way this was going to go. Judge Patricia Morrison was known for being fair but strict. She had 3 children of her own and took custody cases seriously. Ms. Brennan, I'm concerned about the allegations regarding your contract. Can you explain the nature of the federal investigation? Your Honor, the investigation is completely baseless. I had no access to my ex-husband's work and no insider information of any kind. Someone filed a false complaint to damage my custody case, and I'm working with investigators to prove that. And in the meantime, your contract is suspended? Yes, Your Honor. But Secure Core Solutions has other contracts that are proceeding normally. I'm still fully employed and financially stable. What about childcare arrangements while you work? My grandmother moved from Charleston to live with us full-time. She's the primary caregiver when I'm working. The twins are also enrolled in a specialized daycare program for medically fragile children, staffed by pediatric nurses who can handle their equipment and medications. Judge Morrison reviewed the documents in front of her for what felt like an eternity. I'm not prepared to change the custody arrangement at this time. However, I am ordering a full custody evaluation by a court-appointed psychologist. Both parents will be evaluated. Both homes will be assessed. And we'll reconvene in 60 days to review the findings. It wasn't the disaster it could have been, but it wasn't a win either. And the custody evaluation was another expense I couldn't afford, another intrusion into my already chaotic life, another opportunity for Preston and Giselle to present their perfect life while highlighting everything difficult about mine. That night, after putting Piper and Rowan to bed, I sat at my kitchen table and added up the financial damage. Legal fees were approaching $80,000. The custody evaluation would cost another $15,000. I was burning through the signing bonus from the DoD contract, and that contract was now suspended indefinitely. Secure Core had other revenue streams, but nothing close to what the DoD contract represented. If it was permanently canceled, I'd lose not just the money, but the credibility that came with it. Clients would start asking questions. Contracts would be canceled. The company I'd built would collapse. And then I'd lose everything. The business. The house. Maybe even my children. I put my head in my hands and let myself have 5 minutes of despair. 5 minutes to acknowledge that I was drowning. That Preston and Giselle were winning. That maybe I'd been naive to think I could fight people with unlimited resources and no conscience. Then I lifted my head, opened my laptop, and got back to work. Because giving up wasn't an option. Not when Piper and Rowan were sleeping upstairs, trusting that their mother would protect them. Not when my grandmother had given up her home in Charleston to help me. Not when I'd come this far. Rebecca Martinez called 2 days later with news that changed everything. Cassandra, I found out who filed the DoD complaint. It was Giselle Ashworth. How is that even possible? She has nothing to do with my contract. She has connections. Her ex-husband, Tyler Chen, sits on the board of one of the companies that bid against you for the DoD contract. Giselle reached out to him, convinced him that you'd cheated somehow, and he filed a formal complaint. Can we prove that? I'm working on it. But here's the interesting part. While I was digging into Giselle's connections, I found something else. Something big. What? Financial irregularities at Ashworth Capital. Lots of them. Giselle has been running the firm for 3 years, and in that time she's made some very questionable decisions. Investments that lost money but somehow still generated big returns on paper. Client accounts that don't quite add up. Partnership agreements that look designed to hide money rather than make it. Are you saying she's committing fraud? I'm saying something doesn't smell right, and I think it's worth investigating further. If Giselle is dirty, if she's been using Ashworth Capital as a personal piggy bank, that changes everything about your custody case. How long will it take to find out? Give me 3 months and a bigger retainer. I'll need to bring in a forensic accountant. But Cassandra, if I'm right about this, we're not just defending against their attacks anymore. We're going on offense. I thought about my dwindling savings, about the risk of spending money I might need for legal fees or medical emergencies, about the possibility that Rebecca was wrong and I'd waste resources chasing shadows. Then I thought about Giselle Ashworth standing in my driveway, loading my children into her Mercedes like they were accessories she'd purchased. I thought about Preston's smug expression at the custody hearing, confident that his new life with a billionaire meant he'd automatically win. Do it. Whatever you need. Find out what she's hiding. Over the next 3 months, while I fought the custody evaluation and the DOD investigation and the daily chaos of running a company, while parenting medically fragile toddlers, Rebecca Martinez was building a case that would destroy Giselle Ashworth's entire world. The custody evaluation was invasive and humiliating. A court-appointed psychologist named Dr. Sarah Kim came to my house unannounced, 3 times, observing how I interacted with Piper and Rowan. She interviewed my grandmother. She reviewed medical records and therapy schedules. She asked pointed questions about my work-life balance and whether I resented the twins for complicating my career. Do you ever wish things had been different? That your children had been born healthy? Every parent wishes their children didn't have to suffer, but I don't wish for different children. I wish for a world where Piper and Rowan get all the support they need without financial or social barriers. Dr. Kim made notes without commenting on my answer. Then she went to Preston and Giselle's house, the sprawling mansion in Pacific Heights with the private gym and the infinity pool and the full-time staff. She saw Preston and Giselle playing the perfect couple, attentive and engaged. She saw the twins' bedrooms, each larger than my entire apartment, filled with expensive toys and custom furniture. Her report, when it finally came, was more balanced than I'd feared, but still painful to read. Ms. Brennan demonstrates strong attachment to the children and meets their medical needs with competence and dedication. However, her demanding work schedule raises questions about her long-term availability. Mr. Vale and Ms. Ashworth provide a more stable, resource-rich environment, though Mr. Vale's involvement with the children's medical care is limited and his understanding of their daily needs appears superficial. Recommendation: maintain current custody arrangement with Ms. Brennan as primary parent, but increase Mr. Vale's visitation to every other week rather than twice monthly. It wasn't a win. It was a stay of execution, and it came with a modification that meant I'd have less time with my children and Preston would get more opportunities to play devoted father for social media while Giselle's staff did the actual work. But I accepted it because I didn't have a choice, and because Rebecca Martinez had just called with news that made everything else secondary. I've got her. Cassandra, I've got Giselle on 12 years of fraud, embezzlement, falsified investment returns, bribed officials, everything. How much are we talking about? $300 million, minimum, maybe more. She's been running Ashworth Capital like her personal slush fund since the day she took over from her father. Can you prove it? I've got bank records, email correspondence, testimony from former employees who were fired when they questioned the numbers. I've got everything we need to bury her. But Cassandra, this isn't just about your custody case anymore. This is federal. This is FBI-level fraud. What do? We take it to the authorities. We turn over everything I've found, and we let the federal government handle it. But before we do that, I need your permission, because once this starts, there's no taking it back. Giselle will know you're the one who exposed her. Preston will know. This will get ugly. I thought about my children, about the security recordings Rebecca had shown me of Giselle's house, where nannies cared for Piper and Rowan while Giselle and Preston were at charity galas, about the medical appointments Preston had missed because they conflicted with investor meetings, about the casual cruelty of 2 people who viewed my children as inconveniences to be managed rather than human beings to be loved. Do it. Turn over everything. Let's see how stable and resource-rich their environment looks when Giselle is facing federal charges. Rebecca contacted the FBI in early June, 7 months after Preston had left. By July, federal agents were executing search warrants at Ashworth Capital. By August, Giselle Ashworth had been arrested on 23 counts of fraud, conspiracy and obstruction of justice. And suddenly my custody case looked very different. The emergency hearing was scheduled within 48 hours of Giselle's arrest. Judge Morrison reviewed the new circumstances with an expression that suggested she was deeply unhappy with everyone involved. Miss Brennan, did you have prior knowledge of Miss Ashworth's criminal activity? No, Your Honor. I hired a private investigator to look into the source of the ethics complaint filed against me, and that investigation uncovered evidence of financial crimes. I immediately turned that evidence over to federal authorities. And Mr. Vale, you were living with Miss Ashworth and working at her firm. You had no knowledge of these alleged crimes? Preston looked smaller somehow, sitting at the defendant's table without Giselle beside him. She was out on bail but banned from contact with anyone involved in the case. No, Your Honor. I had no idea. Judge Morrison didn't look like she believed him. Regardless, the situation has changed substantially. Miss Ashworth is facing serious federal charges. She is not to have any contact with the children pending trial. Mr. Vale, you're no longer living with Miss Ashworth. No, Your Honor. I've moved to a different residence. Do you have adequate space for the children there? I could see Preston calculating whether the truth or a lie would serve him better. It's a one-bedroom apartment, Your Honor. Temporary, while I figure out my next steps. Judge Morrison shook her head. Then we're maintaining Miss Brennan as primary custodial parent. Mr. Vale, you'll continue your scheduled visitation, but those visits will no longer take place at Miss Ashworth's residence and will not involve Miss Ashworth in any capacity. We'll revisit this arrangement after Miss Ashworth's trial concludes. I walked out of that courtroom with my children, my grandmother waiting outside, with Piper and Rowan, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 8 months. Hope. The DOD investigation concluded 2 weeks later. The Inspector General's office found no evidence of impropriety, and my contract was reinstated with an official apology from Director Hartley. Miss Brennan, I'm sorry for the disruption this caused. The complaint against you was filed in bad faith by parties with personal vendettas. Your work is exemplary, and we're looking forward to full implementation beginning next month. Next month meant September, 1 year since Preston had left. 1 year since I'd started building Secure Core into something that could change my children's lives and my own. The contract signing happened on a Tuesday morning, in the same DOD conference room where I'd done my preliminary briefings. This time my grandmother watched Piper and Rowan in the waiting area. This time, I signed my name on documents that would bring $750 million into Secure Core solutions over the next 5 years. This time, I walked out knowing that Preston had made the most expensive mistake of his life. Because while he'd been playing house with a criminal, I'd been building an empire. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The real victory would come 14 months later, at a gala that would expose every lie, every manipulation, every cruel calculation that had brought us to this moment. And Preston Vale would finally understand what it meant to underestimate Cassandra Brennan. But first, let me tell you about the 18 months between that contract signing and the gala where everything came together. Because this isn't just a story about revenge. It's a story about what you build while your enemies think they've already won. Secure Core Solutions expanded faster than I'd ever imagined possible. The DOD contract was the foundation, but it opened doors I didn't even know existed. Within 6 months, I had contracts with 3 major healthcare systems, 2 financial institutions, and a tech company that had been breached so many times they were desperate for someone who actually knew what they were doing. I hired carefully. Every employee was vetted, not just for technical skills but for values. I wanted people who understood that cybersecurity wasn't just about protecting data, it was about protecting people. I wanted a company culture that proved you could be brilliant and successful without sacrificing your humanity. By month 8, Secure Core had 500 employees across 6 regional offices. We were protecting critical infrastructure, hospital systems, financial networks. Every time someone's medical records stayed private, every time a hospital system stayed online during a crisis, every time a bank's customer data remained secure, that was us. That was the company I'd built while Preston thought I was too overwhelmed to function. But the part Preston really didn't know about, the part that would matter most at the gala, was what I did with the profits. I created 2 divisions. Piper's Promise Initiative provided free cybersecurity services to children's hospitals in underserved communities. Any pediatric facility that couldn't afford proper digital protection got Secure Core services at no cost, because I remembered what it felt like to watch your child fight for life while worrying about whether the hospital's equipment would fail or their records would be compromised. Rowan's Resilience Foundation gave grants to families with premature babies, medical equipment, therapy services, emergency financial assistance when insurance wouldn't cover something critical. Every dollar I gave away, I dedicated to my children. The children Preston had called complications. I named those divisions after Piper and Rowan deliberately, so that their names would be associated with helping people, with making the world better, with the kind of love that shows up instead of walking away, so that when they were old enough to understand what their father had done, they'd also understand what their mother had built in response. Dr. Julian Cross entered my life in month 10, though I didn't realize the significance at the time. I was at a pediatric medical conference in San Diego, speaking on a panel about cybersecurity in children's hospitals. The panel was part of my work with Piper's Promise, trying to convince hospital administrators that digital security wasn't optional anymore. It was life and death. After my presentation, a man approached me, tall, with kind eyes, and the slightly rumpled look of someone who spent more time thinking about patients than appearances. "Ms. Brennan, I'm Dr. Julian Cross. I was Rowan's pulmonologist during his worst respiratory crisis last year." I remembered him instantly. The doctor who'd stayed late 3 nights in a row when Rowan was struggling, who'd explained every treatment option in terms I could understand, who'd never once made me feel like I was being paranoid or overprotective when I asked questions. "Dr. Cross, I remember you. You saved my son's life." He smiled, and it was genuine. No ego, no false modesty, just the quiet confidence of someone who knew his worth without needing to prove it. "I was doing my job, but I wanted to tell you that your presentation was brilliant. The hospital where I work has been dragging its feet on security upgrades. After hearing you speak, I'm going to make it my mission to get them to take it seriously." We talked for 20 minutes about hospital vulnerabilities, about how medical devices could be hacked, about the intersection of healthcare and technology. Then the conversation shifted. "How's Rowan doing now?" "He's thriving. His lungs are stronger every month. He's even talking about playing soccer, which his pediatrician thinks might be possible in another year. That's wonderful." "And his sister?" "Piper's doing great too. Her heart murmur has almost completely resolved. She wants to be an artist. She draws constantly. Everyone in our lives, every place we visit, she documents all of it in these incredibly detailed drawings." "You sound like a proud mother." "I am. They're the best thing I ever helped create." Julian's expression shifted slightly. Not pity, but understanding. "I heard about your divorce. Hospital gossip being what it is. For what it's worth, I think your ex-husband is an idiot." I laughed, surprised by his directness. "That's the professional medical opinion?" "That's the opinion of someone who watched you advocate for your son, like a warrior while your husband couldn't be bothered to show up. Some people don't deserve what they have until they lose it." We exchanged business cards, talked about collaborating on securing his hospital systems, and when the conference ended, I flew back to San Francisco thinking about kind eyes, and the way Julian had looked at me like I was capable instead of overwhelming. He called 2 weeks later, ostensibly to discuss the hospital security project, but the conversation wandered to other topics. Books we'd both read, places we wanted to travel, the challenges of loving a job that demanded everything while trying to maintain some kind of personal life. "It's hard, isn't it?" he said during one of those conversations, "caring about work that matters so much that you forget to care about yourself. I spend most of my time making sure my kids are okay and my company doesn't fall apart. I'm not sure I'd recognize self-care if it introduced itself. Maybe we could practice together. There's a new exhibition at the De Young Museum, abstract art, which I know nothing about. But I thought maybe you and Piper would like to go, as a field trip for her artistic education. And maybe afterward, you and I could get coffee while she draws." It took me a moment to realize he was asking me out, not in a pushy way, in a way that made space for my children, my responsibilities, my complicated life. I'd like that. I'd like that a lot. Our first date was me, Julian, and Piper wandering through the museum, while she critiqued the color choices of artists worth millions. Rowan was with my grandmother, not quite ready for crowds yet. Julian crouched down to Piper's eye level, asking her serious questions about composition, and shading, treating her 3-year-old opinions like they mattered. "I think this one is angry," Piper announced in front of a massive red and black canvas. "Why do you think that?" Julian asked. "Because red is loud and black is heavy. Together, they make angry." That's a very sophisticated analysis. I bet the artist would agree with you. Watching him interact with my daughter, I felt something I hadn't felt since before Preston left. Hope that maybe relationships didn't have to be transactions. That maybe partnership could mean someone celebrating your success instead of resenting it. Julian and I dated slowly, carefully. He understood that my children came first. That some nights I'd have to cancel because Rowan's breathing was off or Piper had a cardiology appointment. He never complained. Never made me feel like my responsibilities were inconveniences. Instead, he showed up, brought dinner when I was too exhausted to cook, sat with me in pediatric waiting rooms when I didn't want to be alone, read medical journals about premature infant development so he could better understand what Piper and Rowan had survived. 3 months into dating, he met Rowan properly. I'd been nervous about it, worried that Rowan would compare Julian to Preston and feel confused or disloyal. But when Julian walked into our apartment with a model of human lungs that he'd borrowed from the hospital, Rowan's eyes lit up. "This is what your lungs look like inside," Dr. Cross explained, showing Rowan the bronchial tubes and alveoli. "See how they're like little trees? When you were born, your trees weren't finished growing yet, but you've been getting stronger every day. And now your trees are almost as strong as anyone else's." Rowan touched the model with reverent fingers. "Can I really play soccer someday? I think you can do anything you set your mind to. Your lungs just might need a little more warm-up time than other kids. But I'll work with your mom to make sure you have everything you need." After Julian left that night, Rowan crawled into my lap. "I like him, Mommy. He doesn't act like Daddy does." "What do you mean, sweetheart? Daddy always seems like he wants to be somewhere else. Dr. Julian seems like he wants to be right here." Out of the mouths of 3-year-olds, the truth Preston couldn't hide even from children who barely understood what was happening. By month 14, Julian and I were serious, not rushed, but intentional. He'd met my grandmother, who'd given him the Charleston interrogation and declared him a man who knows what matters. I'd met his family, who'd welcomed me and the twins with genuine warmth. We talked about futures, about what it might look like to build a life together. "I need you to understand something before this goes any further," I told him one night after the twins were asleep. "Preston destroyed me. Not just the divorce, but the way he did it. The cruelty of it. I thought I knew him, and it turned out I didn't know him at all. So I'm going to need time to trust this, to trust you." Julian took my hand. "Cassandra, I'm not in a rush. I'm not going anywhere. And I promise you that if this doesn't work out, it won't be because I got scared when things got complicated. It'll be because we genuinely weren't right for each other, and we figured that out honestly. Not because I abandoned you when you needed me most. That's when I knew I was falling in love with him. Not because he made grand promises, but because he understood that reliability was more romantic than any gesture." Meanwhile, Rebecca Martinez was putting the finishing touches on the evidence that would bury Giselle Ashworth. The FBI's investigation of Ashworth Capital had uncovered exactly what Rebecca suspected: 12 years of systematic fraud. Giselle had been embezzling from client accounts, falsifying investment returns, bribing officials to secure government contracts for companies she had hidden stakes in. The web of corruption was staggering, but Rebecca found something the FBI hadn't, something that would matter more for my purposes than any financial crime: security footage from Giselle's house. She had cameras everywhere, ostensibly for security, but really because she was paranoid about staff stealing from her. Those cameras had captured 18 months of Preston and Giselle's life together, including the 6 months when they had temporary increased custody of Piper and Rowan. What Rebecca showed me made my blood boil. Footage of my children left alone in their playroom for hours while Preston and Giselle attended charity events, with no nanny or caregiver present. Rowan having a breathing crisis while Preston was in another room on a phone call, not noticing until the emergency alarm went off. Piper crying for her mother while Giselle told her assistant that "These children are exhausting. I can't wait to send them back to Cassandra." Most damning of all, audio of Preston telling Giselle that he was only fighting for custody because it played well for his image, that he didn't actually want primary custody because it would interfere with his career plans. I sat in Rebecca's office, watching my children be neglected by the man who'd claimed I was an unfit mother, and I made a decision. I want all of this. Every frame of footage. Every second of audio. And I want it ready to present at exactly the right moment. What moment is that? You'll know when you see the invitation, because I'd been planning something for months. Something that would bring together everyone who mattered in tech, venture capital, and government contracting. Something that would give me the platform to expose every lie, every manipulation, every crime. The Secure to Core Solutions Annual Gala, celebrating the successful completion of Phase 1 of the National Cybersecurity Modernization Initiative. I sent 500 invitations to industry leaders, investors, politicians, and journalists. I rented the St. Regis Ballroom. I hired caterers and photographers and made sure every detail was perfect. And I made sure that Preston Vale and Giselle Ashworth were on the guest list. Giselle was out on bail, restricted from traveling but allowed to attend business functions. Preston had accepted a position at a smaller venture capital firm. After Ashworth Capital collapsed during the federal investigation, they were still together somehow, bound by shared delusion that they'd survived this scandal. The invitation promised an exciting announcement about Secure Core's future. Industry insiders speculated that I was going public or announcing a major acquisition. They weren't wrong. Julian knew what I was planning. We talked about it late one night, after I'd shown him all the evidence Rebecca had compiled. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "Not because I think they don't deserve it. They absolutely do. But because once you do this, you can't take it back. Your private pain becomes public knowledge." "It's already public, Julian." Preston made sure of that when he fought for custody in open court. Giselle made sure of that when she filed false ethics complaints and talked to journalists about my instability. They weaponized my struggles. Now I'm going to weaponize the truth. Then I support you. Whatever you need. What I need is for you to be there, not as part of the presentation, just there. So when this is over, win or lose, I have someone to come home to who reminds me why I'm doing this. He kissed my forehead. "I'll be right there. Front row if you want, back of the room if you prefer, wherever you need me. I love you." It was the first time I'd said it. The words felt true and terrifying in equal measure. I love you too. And Cassandra, they have no idea what's about to hit them. The night of the gala arrived with the weight of 18 months of planning behind it. I wore midnight blue, the color of the sky right before dawn. My grandmother watched Piper and Rowan at home with strict instructions not to let them watch any news or social media until I got back. Julian wore a simple black suit and sat at a table near the front where I could see him if I needed the reminder that this wasn't just about vengeance. It was about justice. Preston and Giselle arrived fashionably late, making an entrance that announced they weren't ashamed or intimidated. Giselle wore a red gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. Preston wore confidence like armor, ready to network and schmooze like he belonged in this room. They had no idea that before the night was over, federal agents would be taking Giselle into custody. That Preston would understand exactly what he'd thrown away. That I would offer him something he didn't deserve but our children needed. The room settled. Drinks were poured. Appetizers circulated. I waited until everyone was comfortable, relaxed, expecting a standard corporate presentation about quarterly earnings and future projections. Then I took the podium, remote control in hand, and began. "Good evening. Thank you all for joining Secure Core Solutions as we celebrate an incredible milestone. Phase 1 of the National Cybersecurity Modernization Initiative has been completed. 6 months ahead of schedule and $40 million under budget." Applause. Smiles. People were happy, comfortable, unsuspecting. But before we discuss Phase 2 and the exciting announcements I have about Secure Core's future, I want to tell you a story about how we got here. Because success doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens through a series of choices, some noble and some decidedly less so. It happens when people reveal who they really are under pressure. And sometimes it happens because someone underestimated the wrong woman. I could see Preston shift in his seat. Giselle's hand tightened on her champagne glass. They were starting to suspect that this night wasn't going to go the way they'd expected. 3 years ago, I was a woman with a dream, a struggling startup, and 2 premature babies fighting for their lives. I was married to a man I thought understood partnership, commitment, and love. I was naive enough to believe that when you promise to love someone in sickness and in health, you actually mean it. The room was quieter now. People leaning forward, sensing drama. I looked at Preston directly. "You have 30 seconds to explain why you deserve even a single stock option from the woman you called a liability." That's where we started this story, in this very ballroom. But now you know the background. Now you understand what brought us to this moment. And now I'm going to show you exactly what happens when people mistake kindness for weakness, when they weaponize the legal system to destroy someone telling the truth, and when they commit crimes thinking they're too wealthy and connected to face consequences. I clicked the remote. The screens throughout the ballroom came to life with a title slide. The Price of Betrayal, a case study in ethics, fraud, and justice. Section 1, the affair timeline. The first image was Preston and Giselle at the Ritz-Carlton, date stamped during my bed rest pregnancy. Then another from the week Piper and Rowan were born. Then dozens more, a comprehensive timeline of hotel visits, restaurant charges, jewelry purchases, all while I was in the NICU keeping our daughters alive. I narrated with clinical precision. This is March 15th. I'm 7 months pregnant on bed rest. Preston told me he had an investor dinner. Instead, he was at the Ritz-Carlton with his boss beginning an affair that would eventually cost him everything. This is April 23rd. Our daughters are 2 weeks old, in the NICU, each weighing barely 2 pounds. Preston is at the same hotel, room 847, charged to Ashworth Capital's corporate account. This is June 2nd. Rowan has been hospitalized with a respiratory infection. I'm alone in the ICU. Preston is at a beachside restaurant in Carmel with Giselle, charging a $1,200 dinner to our joint credit card. The room was silent, except for the clicking of my remote. Journalists were typing furiously. Preston's face had gone from pink to white to gray. But affairs happen. People are weak. Hearts are broken. That's not criminal. Cruel, yes. Devastating, absolutely. But not illegal. So let's move to Section 2, financial fraud and theft. New slides appeared. Bank statements. Transfer records. The joint savings account Preston had emptied. On November 17th, while our son was in the ICU, Preston Vale transferred $28,000 from our joint savings account, money earmarked for our children's medical expenses, into his personal account. He used that money to buy Miss Ashworth a $50,000 diamond bracelet, charging the difference to a credit card he opened in my name without my knowledge. I pulled out a physical copy of the credit card application, held it up so the cameras could see Preston's forged signature. Identity theft. Fraud. Financial abuse. Should I continue? Giselle stood up. This is absurd. Preston, we're leaving. My voice cut across the room. Sit down, Miss Ashworth, because Section 3 is about you, and you're going to want to hear. This before the FBI agents waiting outside come in to arrest you. She froze. Preston grabbed her arm, pulling her back into her seat. Everyone in the ballroom was riveted now, phones out, recording every moment. Section 3, Giselle Ashworth's criminal enterprise. The screens filled with evidence. Bank transfers, falsified investment documents, email chains discussing bribed officials. 12 years of systematic fraud laid out in undeniable detail. For the past decade, Giselle Ashworth has been running Ashworth Capital as a personal slush fund. She's embezzled over $300 million from investor accounts. She's falsified returns to hide losses. She's bribed government officials to secure contracts for companies she has hidden ownership in. She's destroyed evidence, threatened whistleblowers, and used her wealth to silence anyone who questioned her practices. I clicked to footage of Giselle in her office, talking to her CFO about moving money to offshore accounts. Audio of her discussing how to make evidence disappear. Documents showing shell companies and laundered funds. The FBI has been investigating MS Ashworth for 14 months, building a case based on evidence provided by private investigators and forensic accountants. Evidence that I personally funded and delivered to federal authorities. Because when someone tries to destroy you, the appropriate response isn't to play by their corrupt rules. It's to expose them so completely that they never threaten anyone again. Giselle was pale now, her perfect composure cracking. Preston looked like he might be sick. But here's where it gets interesting, because Section 4 is about the custody battle. The fight for my children that Preston and Giselle waged in court, claiming I was unstable and unfit. Let's examine that claim. Security footage from Giselle's house appeared on the screens. Footage of Piper and Rowan left alone. Audio of Giselle calling them exhausting. Video of Preston ignoring Rowan's breathing crisis to take a phone call about stock options. This is what a stable, resource-rich environment looks like according to Preston Vale and Giselle Ashworth. Children left unsupervised. Medical needs ignored. A 3-year-old asking for her mother while being told she needs to adjust to her new reality. The audio continued. Giselle's voice, clear and damning. I can't wait to send these children back to Cassandra. They're cute for photographs, but exhausting in reality. Then Preston's voice. I'm only fighting for custody because it looks good. Makes me seem like the responsible parent. But honestly, I don't want them full-time. Too much medical drama. The gasps in the room were audible. Medical professionals, parents, human beings with basic empathy reacting to the casual cruelty of two people using children as props. I let the footage play for another 30 seconds before clicking to the next slide. Now let's talk about what they were fighting against. Let's talk about what makes someone unstable in their assessment. Images of Secure Core Solutions appeared. Our offices, our team, our contracts, the divisions I'd built in Piper and Rowan's names. While Preston and Giselle were fighting to take my children, I was building a company valued at $1.8 billion. I was creating Piper's Promise Initiative, which has provided free cybersecurity services to 47 children's hospitals across the country. I was funding Rowan's Resilience Foundation, which has given grants to over 3,000 families with premature babies, totaling $150 million in medical assistance. More images, families we'd helped, hospital systems we'd protected, children who'd received life-saving equipment funded by Rowan's Foundation. I was unstable because I was building something that mattered. I was unfit because I was showing up for every doctor's appointment, every therapy session, every middle-of-the-night breathing crisis. I was a bad mother because I worked 18-hour days to provide for my children, instead of spending their medical fund on jewelry for my mistress. The sarcasm in my voice was cutting. People were nodding, some wiping their eyes. But here's the part you're all waiting for. The announcement I promised about Secure Core's future. New slide. Secure Core Solutions acquires Ashworth Capital Assets, following Miss Ashworth's federal indictment and the subsequent seizure of her assets. Ashworth Capital's holdings were liquidated in a bankruptcy proceeding. Secure Core Solutions purchased those assets, all of them. The investment portfolio, the client accounts, the office buildings, the intellectual property. Everything. Preston's face showed the exact moment he understood. Which means, Mr. Vale, that you now work for me. Your salary, your benefits, your stock options, your career trajectory, all of it is now contingent on my approval as your CEO. The room erupted. Whispers, gasps, the clicking of cameras capturing Preston's expression of absolute devastation. I let the chaos continue for a moment before raising my hand for silence. Now, you might think this is about revenge, that I brought you all here to publicly humiliate the people who tried to destroy me. And I won't lie, there's satisfaction in this moment, in watching two people who weaponized their wealth and connections finally face consequences for their actions. But that's not why we're really here. I clicked to a new slide, a photo of me with Julian, Piper, and Rowan at the park. All of us laughing, genuine, and unposed. We're here because I want to tell you about the lovely twist in this story, the part that makes all the pain and struggle worth it. Julian stood up, making his way to the stage. I took his hand as he joined me at the podium. This is Dr. Julian Cross, pediatric pulmonologist, the man who saved my son's life during his worst respiratory crisis, the man who showed me that real partnership means celebrating your success, not resenting it, who treats my children like treasures instead of inconveniences, who understands that love means showing up, especially when it's hard. Julian squeezed my hand, smiling at me with such genuine affection that several people in the audience sighed audibly. The lovely twist isn't revenge, though justice is certainly satisfying. The lovely twist is discovering that when someone breaks your heart, they make room for someone who will treasure it. That professional success means nothing if you don't have people who genuinely celebrate it with you. That our children are watching everything we do, learning lessons about love and loyalty and consequences. I turned to look at Preston directly. Which brings me to the choice I'm offering you, Preston. You can resign from your position at what is now my company. I'll provide a generous severance package, excellent references for positions elsewhere, and we'll part ways professionally. Or you can stay. Take a junior position. Work your way up legitimately, based on actual merit instead of connections. Prove to Piper and Rowan that their father is capable of growth and change. The room was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Because here's what I've learned through all of this. Our children are watching. They're learning what love looks like, what integrity means, what happens when you abandon people versus when you show up for them. And I refuse to teach them that cruelty goes unpunished or that grace is weakness. I looked out at the audience, at the cameras, at the journalists documenting every word. So yes, Preston can stay in my company if he chooses, but he'll earn every promotion. He'll work for every stock option, and most importantly, he'll show his daughters that people can change if they're willing to do the hard work of becoming better. I clicked to the final slide. Just text, simple and clear. The best revenge is becoming so successful that their opinion becomes irrelevant. That's the real message tonight. Not that I destroyed the people who hurt me, though accountability matters, but that I built something beautiful despite them. That I found love that actually shows up. That I created a legacy for my children that proves their mother never gave up, never stopped fighting, and never let anyone else's limitations define her worth. I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. Now, Preston, what's your choice? Walk away with dignity, or stay and earn redemption? Preston stood slowly. Every eye in the room was on him. Giselle grabbed his arm, but he shook her off. Walked to the front of the room. Stopped a few feet from the stage. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. I'd like to stay, if you'll have me. I want to prove to Piper and Rowan that I can be better than I've been. It wasn't a full apology. Wasn't adequate for what he'd done, but it was a start. Then you'll report to Human Resources on Monday. Junior analyst position. Market rate salary, no special treatment. You'll earn every opportunity from here on out. Preston nodded, unable to meet my eyes, and returned to his seat. Away from Giselle, I noticed. Choosing, for perhaps the first time, the harder right over the easier wrong. As for Miss Ashworth, FBI agents entered the ballroom on cue. I'd coordinated the timing perfectly, with the federal prosecutor handling her case. Giselle Ashworth, you're under arrest for violations of federal fraud statutes, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. They read her rights, while photographers captured every moment. Giselle, handcuffed and humiliated, being led out of the ballroom while 500 industry leaders watched her fall. Justice isn't always pretty, but it's necessary. After Giselle was removed, I returned to my prepared remarks. Now, let's talk about Phase 2 of our cybersecurity initiative. Because unlike some people, I keep my promises and deliver on my commitments. The rest of the gala went off perfectly. Contracts signed. Partnerships announced. Secure Core's expansion into international markets unveiled. By the end of the night, we'd secured another $800 million in new business, and I'd proven that a black woman from Charleston could not only survive being underestimated, she could thrive because of it. Julian was waiting for me when I stepped off the stage, pulling me into a hug that felt like coming home. You were magnificent. I was terrified. You were both. That's what made it perfect. We left the gala together, Julian's arm around my waist, and went home to relieve my grandmother and tuck Piper and Rowan into bed. Because at the end of the day, the biggest victory wasn't humiliating Preston or exposing Giselle. It was walking into my children's room and knowing I'd protected them. Knowing they'd grow up understanding that their mother never stopped fighting for them. Knowing they'd learn that love means showing up, that betrayal has consequences, but that grace is always an option. That was the real win. 6 months later, the world looked completely different. Giselle's trial was the scandal of the year. Federal prosecutors presented the evidence I'd helped compile, along with testimony from former employees, clients, and officials she'd bribed. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all 23 counts. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in federal prison and ordered $247 million in restitution. Her family's fortune, built over 3 generations, was destroyed in a single afternoon. I didn't attend the sentencing. I'd said everything I needed to say at the gala. Watching her go to prison wouldn't make me feel better or heal the damage she'd caused. It would just keep me connected to her story instead of building my own. Preston chose to stay at Secure Core. He showed up every day, worked hard, and slowly, painfully, rebuilt a relationship with Piper and Rowan. It wasn't easy. There were sessions with family therapists, difficult conversations about why Daddy had left and what it meant that he was trying to come back now. But he showed up, to every scheduled visit, to Piper's art shows, to Rowan's first soccer game, where our son played for 15 minutes before, needing a breathing break, and Preston cheered like Rowan had won the World Cup. I'll never forgive him completely. Some betrayals leave scars that don't fully heal. But I made peace with the fact that Preston's relationship with our children didn't have to be perfect to be valuable. It just had to be present. And watching him work his way up from junior analyst to senior analyst to team, lead over those 6 months, I saw something I'd never seen during our marriage. Humility. The willingness to admit he'd been wrong. The understanding that privilege and connections only take you so far. Eventually you have to deliver actual value. He'd never be the partner he'd promised to be when we married. But he was becoming a father his daughters didn't have to be ashamed of. That was enough. Julian and I got married in April, a small ceremony in my grandmother's garden with Piper and Rowan as flower girls. They took their responsibilities very seriously, arguing about petal distribution patterns, and whether the aisle needed to be perfectly straight or artistically curved. Perfect, Piper insisted, smoothing petals into straight lines. Art is better, Rowan countered, scattering petals in swooping arcs. They compromised on organized chaos, which seemed appropriate for our family. My grandmother cried through the entire ceremony, just like she had at my first wedding. But these were different tears. Not hope that I was breaking the cycle, but certainty that I already had, that I'd built a life defined by my choices rather than my circumstances, that I'd found a partner who understood that supporting someone means amplifying their success, not diminishing it. Julian's vows made me cry. Cassandra, I promise to celebrate every victory with you, not resent them. To show up for the hard moments, not just the easy ones. To love Piper and Rowan as fiercely as you do, because they're part of the extraordinary woman you are, not in spite of them. I promise to be your partner in the truest sense, walking beside you, not ahead of you or behind you. And I promise that our children, the ones sleeping upstairs and any we might have together, will grow up knowing what love actually looks like. We honeymooned in Charleston, showing Piper and Rowan where I grew up, walking them through my grandmother's old neighborhood, pointing out the houses she'd cleaned to pay for my mother's education, taking them to the church where Preston and I had married, explaining that sometimes things don't work out the way you plan, but that doesn't mean they're working out wrong. Piper drew everything. The church, the houses, my grandmother laughing with old friends. Her art was getting more sophisticated, capturing not just what things looked like, but what they felt like. This is where Mommy learned to be strong, she announced, showing me a drawing of my grandmother's hands, weathered and powerful, holding the world together through sheer determination. That's exactly right, baby. That's exactly what this place is. Secure Core continued to grow. We hit $2.3 billion in valuation by summer, expanded into 12 countries, protected infrastructure for governments, hospitals, financial institutions, and tech companies across the globe. But the part I was most proud of was still Piper's promise and Rowan's resilience, the divisions that gave back instead of just taking profit. We'd helped 94 hospitals upgrade their security systems, provided grants to over 8,000 families with premature babies, created a model that proved businesses could be profitable and purposeful simultaneously. Every time someone told me I was inspiring, I corrected them. I'm not inspiring. I'm the result of refusing to give up when giving up would have been easier. Anyone can do this if they're willing to work hard enough and mad enough simultaneously. In September, 1 year after the gala, I was invited to speak at Stanford's Graduate Business School, the same building where I'd met Preston over a laptop and a cybersecurity problem, the same library where he'd told me we were unstoppable. Standing in front of 300 graduate students, I told them the whole story. Preston's betrayal, Giselle's fraud, the custody battles and federal investigations and midnight work sessions while my children slept, the gala revelation, the choice I'd offered Preston, and the grace that made space for redemption. But I also told them about Julian, about finding love that celebrated instead of competed, about my grandmother's sacrifices, and Piper's art, and Rowan's determination to play soccer despite lungs that had started out barely functional. Here's what they don't teach you in business school, I concluded. Success isn't just about profit margins and market share. It's about what you do when everything falls apart. It's about who you become when you're betrayed by the person who promised to love you forever. It's about whether you use your success to lift others up or just to prove you're better than the people who doubted you. A student raised her hand. How did you not become bitter? How did you offer Preston a chance at redemption instead of just destroying him completely? I thought about the question, about all the nights I'd fantasized about ruining Preston, about the satisfaction I'd felt watching his face at the gala, about the temptation to punish him forever instead of giving him space to grow, because bitterness would have destroyed me more than it destroyed him, because my children were watching and I wanted them to learn that accountability and grace can coexist, because the best revenge isn't making someone else's life worse, it's making your own life so good that their opinion becomes irrelevant. The students applauded, but one young woman in the front row looked skeptical. But don't you worry that you're letting him off too easy? That he gets to rebuild his life while you had to survive all that pain? He's not getting off easy. He lost a wife who loved him. He lost 18 months with his children. He lost the respect of everyone who knows what he did. He's working a job that pays a fraction of what he used to make, reporting to people who know his entire humiliating history. That's not easy. That's consequences. I paused, making sure she understood. But if he does the work, if he shows up consistently for Piper and Rowan, if he proves he's capable of change, then maybe in 20 years, when my daughters look back on their childhood, they'll remember a father who made terrible mistakes but worked hard to fix them. That's not for him. That's for them. And I will endure anything, including watching their father rebuild his life, if it means. My children have a relationship with him that doesn't require years of therapy to process. After my talk, a black woman approached me. She was probably in her mid-40s, dressed in business casual with an air of exhausted determination I recognized immediately. "Miss Brennan, I'm a single mother of 3, working full-time, trying to finish my MBA at night. My ex-husband left when our youngest was diagnosed with special needs. He said it was too much. I'm drowning most days. How did you keep going?" I took her hands. "You keep going because you don't have a choice. Because your children are watching and learning that women in our family don't quit. Because every night you survive is proof you're stronger than you knew. And because one day, I promise you, you'll be standing where I'm standing, telling someone else how you made it through." She started crying. I hugged her while she shook with the kind of sobs that come from being seen, being understood, being told that the impossible thing you're attempting is actually achievable. That moment, more than the gala or the contract wins or even my wedding to Julian, felt like success. Because changing the narrative wasn't just about my story. It was about every woman who'd been told she was too much or not enough. Every mother who'd been abandoned when life got complicated. Every person who'd been underestimated and decided to prove them wrong. We weren't just building companies or winning contracts. We were building proof that the limitations other people tried to impose didn't have to define us. That was the legacy I wanted to leave for Piper and Rowan. Not just wealth or success, but the unshakable certainty that they came from a woman who refused to be small just because it would make other people comfortable. 2 years after the gala, Preston asked if he could speak to me privately. We met at a coffee shop near Secure Corps' office, neutral territory where neither of us had the advantage. He looked different, older maybe, but also more substantial, like he'd finally grown into himself instead of just wearing the costume of success. "I wanted to thank you for not destroying me when you had every right to. I didn't do it for you, Preston. I did it for Piper and Rowan. I know, but still, you gave me a chance I didn't deserve, and I want you to know I'm grateful. I'm not going to waste it. Good, because if you hurt my children again, there won't be another chance. I know that too." He fidgeted with his coffee cup. "I've been in therapy, trying to figure out how I became the kind of man who could abandon his sick children. And I think I finally understand something." "What's that?" I was terrified of the responsibility, of feeling out of control, of watching you be better at something that mattered more than anything I was doing. So I found someone who made me feel powerful again, and I told myself that was love, that was happiness. But it was just ego, and ego isn't sustainable when reality shows up. I studied him, trying to determine if this was genuine growth or just practice lines. "What made you realize that?" "Watching Rowan play soccer. Seeing how hard he has to work just to breathe properly while running. Watching him fall down and get back up and keep playing because he wants it so badly. And understanding that at his age, I would have quit. I would have said it was too hard and found something easier. He's 3 years old, and he's already braver than I've ever been." Preston's voice cracked. "I threw away a family full of people braver than me because I was scared. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of getting to know them." For the first time since he'd served me divorce papers, I felt something other than anger or contempt when I looked at Preston. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the possibility of it, somewhere down the road. "Keep showing up, Preston. That's all you can do. Keep showing up and doing the work." He nodded, wiped his eyes, and we finished our coffee talking about Piper's upcoming art show and Rowan's request to try basketball next season. It wasn't friendship, but it was peace. And that was more than I'd thought possible 2 years ago. On my 35th birthday, Julian surprised me with something I didn't know I needed. A foundation, the Cassandra Brennan Foundation for Women in Tech and Single Mothers. Funded with $50 million from our combined resources, dedicated to providing legal assistance, financial support, and business mentorship to women fighting custody battles against wealthier opponents. Because no one should have to face what you faced, Julian said as we reviewed the foundation documents. No one should have to choose between fighting for their children and building their career. This way, maybe they won't have to. I cried, the kind of crying that comes from being so deeply understood that it physically hurts. This is the most romantic thing anyone has ever done for me. Julian laughed. More romantic than the time I performed emergency medicine on Rowan at 2 in the morning? More romantic than that, though that was pretty good too. The foundation launched quietly without press releases or media attention. Just a website and resources for women who needed them. Within 3 months, we'd assisted 47 mothers fighting custody battles against wealthy ex-partners, provided legal representation, expert witnesses, private investigators, helped document abuse, neglect, and manipulation that family courts often missed when dazzled by wealth and status. Every woman we helped felt like redemption. Not for me, but for the system that had almost failed me and my children. We were building alternative infrastructure, support systems that didn't. It required you to be exceptional or lucky to survive your divorce. You just had to reach out, ask for help, let someone else carry part of the weight for a while. Piper turned 5 and announced she wanted to be a cybersecurity artist. What's a cybersecurity artist? Julian asked, perfectly serious. Someone who makes computers safe and also makes art about it so everyone understands. Because Mommy says the problem with technology is people don't understand how it works, and art helps people understand things. I couldn't have explained Secure Core's mission better myself. Rowan turned 5 and made the soccer team. The coach worked with us to ensure he had breathing breaks and equipment nearby. Watching him play, lungs that had once needed machines to function now, powering him across the field, I understood something fundamental. Survival wasn't the victory. Thriving was. My children weren't just living despite difficult starts. They were excelling because I'd refused to accept limitations. Because I'd built a life that gave them every advantage while teaching them that advantages mean nothing without character. That balance, success without entitlement, confidence without arrogance, was the legacy that mattered. On the 3rd anniversary of the gala, I received an email from the Department of Defense. Ms. Brennan, we are pleased to inform you that Secure Core Solutions has been selected for the Phase 3 National Cybersecurity Modernization Initiative. This contract, valued at $1.2 billion over 7 years, represents the largest cybersecurity contract in federal history. $1.2 billion. Added to our existing contracts and commercial work, it brought Secure Core's total value over $4 billion. I was a black woman from Charleston, daughter of a housekeeper, mother of medically fragile twins, and I'd built a $4 billion company while my ex-husband thought I was too overwhelmed to function. The irony was delicious, but more important than the money or the validation was what it represented. Proof that the people who underestimate you don't determine your potential. Proof that being discarded by someone who couldn't see your worth just means you haven't found the people who will. Proof that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing you'll ever build. I called my grandmother first. Grandma, we got the Phase 3 contract. She laughed, that deep, joyful sound that had comforted me through every crisis. Baby, I never doubted you for a second. Not when you were scared in the NICU. Not when Preston left. Not when those evil people tried to take your children. I knew you were going to be extraordinary. You just had to believe it yourself. I believe it now. I know you do. And Cassandra, your mama would be so proud. She fought so hard to give you opportunities she never had. And you took those opportunities and built something that's going to help thousands of people. That's legacy, baby. That's what it's all about. We talked for an hour about everything and nothing, about Piper and Rowan and Julian, about the foundation and the contracts and the life I'd built from the ashes of the life I'd planned. When we hung up, I sat in my office, the corner suite of a building I owned, overlooking San Francisco Bay, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete peace. Not because everything was perfect. Life never is. But because I'd survived the worst and built something beautiful on the other side. Because I had children who were thriving, a partner who celebrated every victory, work that mattered, and the financial security to ensure my family would never struggle the way my grandmother had. I'd done it. Not perfectly. Not without scars. But I'd done it. And that was enough. So, where are you right now? What's the weather like where you're watching this story unfold? Are you in a coffee shop, taking a break from your own struggles? In your car before heading into a job that doesn't appreciate you? At home after putting your kids to bed, wondering if you'll ever build the life you dreamed about? Here's what I need you to hear. Your worth isn't determined by the people who underestimated you. The person who discarded you when things got hard did you a favor. They showed you who they really were before you wasted more years waiting for them to become who they promised to be. Setbacks aren't failures. They're setups for something greater if you're willing to do the work. Grace is powerful, but accountability is necessary. You can offer people chances to redeem themselves while still protecting yourself and the people you love. Real love celebrates your success instead of resenting it. If someone treats your accomplishments like threats, they're showing you exactly who they are. Believe them. Your children are watching. Not just your biological children, but the people who look to you for proof that surviving is possible. They're learning from your example what resilience looks like, what integrity means, what happens when you refuse to give up. If this story moved you, if you've ever been abandoned at your lowest point, if you know what it's like to build something extraordinary while someone tells you you're not enough, I need you to understand that you're not broken. You're not a liability. You're not defined by the people who couldn't see your value. You're becoming exactly who you were always meant to be. And sometimes, just sometimes, the woman called a liability becomes the one holding all the assets. This is Cassandra Brennan, reminding you that the best revenge isn't making someone else's life worse. It's making your own life so good that their opinion becomes irrelevant. Keep fighting for what matters. Keep believing in your worth. Keep building something beautiful from whatever circumstances life has handed you. Because being underestimated by the wrong person just means you haven't yet met the ones who will recognize you as their most valuable asset. And trust me, those people are out there waiting to celebrate everything you're about to become.